Cutting off Russia from the global internet. New laws are going through parliament to control and even stop information online. Opponents say it's even more censorship. So is Vladimir Putin building his own version of China's Great Firewall? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hashem, Ahelbarra. Television's long been Russia's main source for news under the watchful eye of President Putin. But the internet is fast eroding state television's influence. And Russia's main opposition figure, Alexei Navalny, is among those running YouTube channels to provide an alternative voice. The Kremlin's not happy. And through a combination of legislation and surveillance infrastructure, it wants to ensure it has control of all media. New bills going through parliament are aimed at creating a single command post from which the government can decide what information is allowed online. Putin says it's a defensive response to Trump administration's new cyber strategy, but critics say it's meant to stave off any domestic political unrest. Step Vassen sets up our discussion from Moscow.
This is just the latest effort by the government to control the internet. In previous years, many restrictions have been imposed already. 154,000 sites have already been blocked. But this bill is more far-reaching than previous ones. But to really control the internet, experts say the government needs a lot of money and a lot of manpower. So to create something like in China, the Great Firewall, many see that as an unrealistic plan here in Russia.
Because I don't want to live like in China with a Chinese firewall. I want internet to be free, and I want to think free and to use my mind everywhere. And I don't want some ban. And I think it would be worst because in our country our politicians don't have any limits like in China, and that's why I think it would be worst.
There's been a growing crackdown on internet freedom in Russia in recent years. On Thursday, the lower house approved bills banning what's described as disrespect of the state and the spreading of what the government calls fake news. They still have to pass the upper house before Putin can sign them into law. Rights groups say dozens of people have been arrested for sharing or even liking memes on the internet, which are considered extremist by the Kremlin. Last year, the government tried to outlaw communications app Telegram, a move that caused other services to crash because it interfered with the Amazon and Google servers that Telegram relied on. And in the North Caucasus, mobile internet services were cut for almost 2 weeks in an attempt to stop anti-government protests. Let's bring in our panel in Moscow. We have Viktor Olevich. He's the lead analyst at the Center for Actual Politics. In London, Sam Greene, director of the Russia Institute at King's College, London, and author of the book Moscow in Movement, Power and Opposition in Putin's Russia. Also in Moscow, Alexander Soloviev, member of the advocacy group Open Russia. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining Inside Story. Viktor, I would like to ask you, is this a bill meant to implement censorship, or is it disguised in the form of protecting national sovereignty in Russia?
No, it is a bill that is intended to protect Russia and Russian citizens in the internet space in an age when the internet has become a medium for adversarial information warfare. If you remember the 1990s when the internet was starting around the world, it was not yet, especially in the beginning of the 90s, it was not yet widely used enough for information warfare. But starting from the 2000 and later on, we have seen the internet being used by different actors on the international stage to advance their national interests, frequently at the expense of other international actors and other countries. We have seen cyber attacks being launched by different actors against each other. We have seen cyber threats being openly stated by international officials. If you remember, in December of 2016, after the American election that didn't go the way that the Obama White House hoped it would, then Vice President Joe Biden openly threatened cyber attacks against Russia. So it is quite logical that Russia would take steps to protect itself from possible cyber attacks, from other possible steps that its adversaries may take in the internet and social media networks.
We will talk more in details about those steps. Sam, is this an attempt to preserve digital sovereignty from a Russian perspective, or is this clearly a flagrant move to clamp down on dissent in Russia?
As your reported introduction suggested, right, there's a lot of things going on at the same time, and there's a history and a background to this. There's been legislation ramping up restrictions on the internet really since 2012, 2013, and a lot of it seems to point in one direction. So unfortunately, maybe from the Kremlin's perspective, right, legislation that has to do with sovereignty and security is going to be interpreted, certainly by the people that we've seen on the streets in Moscow and other Russian cities today, in that context, right, as part of a restrictive drive. Are there legitimate sovereignty and security concerns? I'm sure there are for Russia, as for any other country on Earth. But what the opposition will wonder, right, is where the line will be drawn between what the Kremlin will perceive as foreign interference, right, and what is, in fact, legitimate domestic opposition. And of course, the opposition believes, and history has shown so far, right, that the Kremlin sees almost all opposition as part of some nefarious, generally Western plot to overthrow Vladimir Putin.
Alexander, the government, as Olevich was basically saying, sees now the internet as being used by other governments to advance their own agenda to further destabilize other countries by using cyber attack. And therefore, the government think this is the right time to change things on the ground.
Well, actually, of course, I do not agree with the statement that this is the attempt of the government to defend our country or something, because this has nothing in connection with the defense of our country. It's just another classical tool of a crackdown in order to try to control all the information resources in our country, because every independent agenda has come into the internet, and just because you have no opportunity to spread your ideas in the television or something like that, or radio or newspapers, everything is being controlled by the state except internet. And of course, they are trying to do this, saying that this is very important for the Russian security, though they have in the reality two main goals. First goal, as I have already mentioned, is an attempt to control the information, but the second goal, as the classical corrupted, deeply corrupted state, they just see this as another opportunity to steal more money from the budget, because first of all, it was said that this law would not demand any ruble from the state budget. Then they said, okay, we'll need 2 billion rubles. Then they multiplied this figure into 10, and they've been telling that we need 20 billion rubles. Now they are talking about 150 billion rubles. We do not know if this figure will ever stop, and this is the classical scenario for any attempt to block internet, because we've already seen that with Telegram. It didn't work.
Viktor, I mean, in practical terms, how is it possible to start this whole new approach basically by rerouting the flow of information through centralized hubs controlled by the government? From a technical perspective, is it possible? How much time is it going to take, and at what cost?
Well, first of all, I want to dispute the claim by Alexander that all Russian media is state-controlled or under the control of the government. There are a number of newspapers, magazines, and Russian-based internet sites and resources that are not only not controlled by the state or by the government, but are quite openly opposed to government initiatives or the government positions in the course, political course itself. And we can openly talk about naming those publications that are very well known. Going back to your question, of course, Russia is very much interested in protecting itself in case, for example, the United States or others decide to switch it off internet, especially since 2014. There have been calls in some Western quarters, especially in Washington and in the capitals of its closest allies in the West, to possibly, so to say, quote unquote, punish Russia for behavior that the United States does not believe is in its national interest, and to switch it off internet. We have heard similar demands to switch Russia out of the SWIFT, the banking system, and Russia has proceeded since 2014 to set up its own credit card system in case the SWIFT system is blocked. Russia is blocked out of the system like Iran was before. And so Russia is preparing exactly for that, for the worst type scenario, where the United States and possibly some of its other Western partners will try to blockade or switch Russia off the international internet grid. Also, Russia is attempting to protect itself from such threats as we have seen recently, even in recent days.
Okay.
I am referring to the cyber attack against Venezuela, where much of Caracas and some other Venezuelan cities have been
Viktor, I'll definitely
under a blackout because of a cyber attack.
If you don't mind, I'll definitely come back to you. But you know, what's interesting here, and this is going to be my question to Sam, Viktor, you seem to be talking about attacks targeting Russia, but at the same time you're ignoring the fact that the international community, united, said that the Russians, particularly the GRU, which is the Russian military intelligence, has been responsible, and I'm quoting the British government, reckless, indiscriminate cyber attacks in different parts of the world. Sam?
Well, I mean, I suppose that maybe the experience that Russia has had on the other side of the coin, right, does make it maybe more aware of the power that these sorts of cyber attacks can, in fact, have were they ever to be directed towards Russia itself. To date, there haven't been significant attacks, at least not ones of which we're aware, aimed at Russia. But Russia certainly is aware of how this game can be played and how the damage can be done, whether in places like the UK, the United States, or closer to home in Ukraine and the Baltics, where there have been various things, whether they're done by people in the Russian state or people acting sort of privately. We don't exactly know. We have our suspicions, I suppose, and time will tell. I think that's a little bit of a rabbit hole, though, to get into these sorts of accusations that involve secret services. I mean, we're not going to be able to sort them out. The reality is, of course, that states do have a right to protect themselves. The question is the state in this case acting more to protect itself from foreign actors or from domestic actors? And the habit from the Kremlin, really since 2004, after the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, right, has been to accuse any opposition movement in Russia of acting at the behest and with the backing of foreign governments. And so there is a lot of nervousness that this creates among those in Russia who would like to see a different political course.
Alexander, would you be concerned if the web traffic is suddenly rerouted through points controlled by the government in Russia?
Well, I cannot even imagine how can they actually shut down the internet in Russia, because as I've already mentioned, they have already tried to do this with Telegram, and it affected everyone but Telegram. So all of those attempts actually look a bit ridiculous because they do not work on one simple reason. The internet did not enter Russian Federation as it did in China. It entered Russian Federation sporadically. We had thousands of different providers. We do still have them, and this is not quite possible. Even if it is, they will just spend a lot of money, enormous sums of money, and still it would not let them control all the information. And of course, that would create a lot of problems for us, for people who want to share independent information with no control. But the main problem it creates for us right now is that the fact that taxpayers are going to pay for that stupid law.
Viktor, when you look at the bill itself, some of the provisions of the bill, they're really vague, giving officials in Moscow huge powers to shut down wherever they think, deem, or decide is a threat to the nation.
Well, it will take years to implement this bill, and as you have correctly pointed out, it has not yet passed the upper house of the Russian parliament, the Council of the Federation. And there are very likely to be more amendments to it, and it is very likely that in the course of being implemented, as frequently happens, there will be further amendments made to the law to make sure that the industry, the IT industry, the internet service providers, and other parties that are affected by the bill are comfortable implementing it in the most effective way. And again, I want to dispute what Sam said about Russia launching attacks against the West and the West never launching cyber attacks against Russia. In fact, there have been publications citing anonymous sources in Western special services, in American publications, stating that cyber attacks had been ordered against Russia, against the Russian banking system in the past few years. So Russia, just like other countries around the world, has a lot to fear as far as possible actions by its adversaries against its cyber infrastructure, against its economic infrastructure using the internet, and against the users of its social media platforms.
Sam, do you think that the Russian government is now paving the way to replicate the Chinese Great Firewall?
No, I don't think it is, mostly because, as Alexander was saying earlier, I don't think it's quite possible, right? The internet has been a very different experience for Russians. We have seen, as I mentioned earlier, since 2012, 2013, the introduction of blacklists that have blocked a number of websites, some of which for very good reason, others because they politically didn't fit in with the Kremlin's agenda. And Russians have proved very adept at using VPNs and other technology to get around that sort of blockage. Russians of all political stripes, really across the spectrum, put a tremendous amount of value on their ability to get information. The internet is important to all of them, and so the likelihood is that the Russian government will always be playing catch up when it comes to trying to shape behavior and the flow of information online.
Alexander, do you agree with the general sentiment in Russia that the reason why they are trying to implement this law is that for many years Putin has been using mainstream television to advance his own agenda? But suddenly he's discovering, and his advisors are discovering, that his opponents are turning to the digital platforms, and suddenly they're becoming larger than life, particularly Alexei Navalny. Therefore, he's trying to take his vengeance by targeting the internet.
Well, I would totally agree with this statement, because the fact of the independent and the fact of itself of spreading information annoys Putin and all the system, this kleptocratic system, because this system is being ruled by people from the Cold War era. They hate the independent spreading information, and they just want to control everything. And of course, they are being pissed off by the fact that people are saying truth in the internet. People are saying people are discussing some actions of our authorities which are absolutely unacceptable for people, on all that kind of stuff. Television no longer controls everything, because television spreads mostly hatred in Russia, but people cannot take hatred all the time. They're fed up with the hatred, and they sooner or later they will go to some other sources, for instance to internet, not exactly to find political information, but at least not to watch TV. And this is the problem for the current regime. Absolutely.
Victor, let's move forward in our discussion now. Let's assume that the government is finally able to control the physical infrastructure of the platform. However, it will have to control the content of those platforms. I'll give you an idea. If they have to deal with YouTube, with Facebook, and other international global social media networks, how are they going to deal with them? Are they going to ask them to deliver the user identity, to clamp down on the freedom of expression? How do you think those giants will make concessions to the Russian government?
Well, Google and other IT giants, social media giants, have already been negotiating for years with the Chinese government, for example, and a number of other governments have taken steps for the so-called sovereignization of their internet. I am talking about Thailand, for example, and Vietnam. And in fact, Singapore is in a similar process right now of reassessing its internet policy. And so the American-based internet and social media giants will have to also look at their own policy in the future. You mentioned Facebook. Facebook has been facing criticism both in the United States, in Great Britain, and around the world for its own censorship efforts, for banning users for making statements that are not to the liking of Facebook top management. In fact, there has been censorship in Facebook that due to ideological differences with what the Facebook top leadership believes to be correct, the correct line. And a number of other, there have been privacy concerns with Facebook. So at this point, Russia is not, I want to reiterate, Russia is not interested in cutting off the internet. Russia is not interested at this point in censoring or banning foreign internet companies, Facebook or others.
Fair enough, I get your point.
In an emergency situation, if
I'll
the
have to
Russian
move forward if you
believes, believes that such action...
I'll have to move forward. Sam, do you think that giants like Google, YouTube, and other companies will ultimately have to compromise the international ideals or universal ideals of access to information and freedom of expression at the expense of the massive revenues they make in countries like Russia?
Well, I think Victor has pointed out something very important, which is that Facebook and Google and others have made compromises in places like China in particular, right, due to the size of that market, right? And they have come, in fact, to the extent that they've been criticized by governments in the West for censorship. Really, it's been they've been criticized over privacy, but they've been criticized over the compromises that they have made, and of course their users and to a certain extent their shareholders have criticized that for that as well. So there are indeed some very important dilemmas, right, that these companies are having to come to grips with, right? Are they out there to make money, or do they have to recognize the social function and to a certain extent the democratizing function that they play in countries like Russia or in countries like Iran, potentially in countries like China?
Fortunately, we're running out of time. Thank you very much indeed, Sam, Greene, Viktor, Olevich, and Alexander Soloviev. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com, for further discussion. Go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem, Ahelbarra, and the whole team here. Bye for now.